off your cell phones, and there's no flash photography, and there will be a book signing up in the lobby. Welcome to the Free Library. My name is Deborah Commons, and as you saw in the brief video that just aired, the Free Library is dedicated to advancing literacy, guiding learning, and inspiring curiosity. From its award-winning, to its thought-provoking programs and life-changing resources for all ages. Many of the library's programs and services are made possible only with the help of private support. A gift of whatever amount you are able to helps the Free Library to transform lives. Please make your gift online at freelibrary.org/support. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Wall Street Journal sports columnist Jason Gay. During his long and successful career, he has written for GQ, Rolling Stone, Outside, and Vogue, among many others. His column is read by a national audience 2 days a week, with topics that range from the Little League World Series to the Tour de France, with detours into his own personal life. Business Insider has called him one of the best columnists and the best writers around. Perhaps it is from his sports writing, constantly detailing winners and losers, that the concept for his new book was created. In the book's introduction, he explains, accomplishments do not have to be large to be meaningful. I think little victories are the most important ones in life. Famed author Elizabeth Gilbert says, I loved this book. Jason Gay's Little Victories is funny, wise, direct, deceptively straightforward, and incredibly moving. I'm pleased to have him with us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Jason Gay.
I didn't even hear the introduction. I'm John Updike. Thank you very much for having me here to the Free Library. I'm honored to be part of this program. You go backstage and you see these people who have been part of this program, and I'm not worthy. I am not worthy. But it's really cool to be here. I live in Brooklyn, New York. My apartment is about the size of that table right there. It's actually it's a little smaller than that table. But as great as it is to be here in Philadelphia, and as great as honored as I am to be here at the Free Library, I have to level with you. I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old at home. I will go anywhere to talk about this book, okay? We could be at a Burger King on 95, and I will talk about this book, believe me. So don't make me go back there. Oh, look, my book valet. But so this is my first book, Little Victories. And, like every first-time author, I'm making all those first-time author mistakes. I'm learning on the road. I'm learning how to do this. And in my neighborhood, there are a handful of authors, a lot of people who have been through the battles and the trenches. And there's a guy in my neighborhood, a character I like to describe as cynical author guy. He's a guy who just, you know the type, smoking outside and a little world weary, been through it all. And he says to me, well, you're having a book come out, right, Jason? And I said, yeah. He said, well, when's it come out? I said, well, it's coming out November 3rd, and I'm going to be going out and, talking to people about it. And he goes, talking to people about it. Oh, man, wait, just get ready, because you are going to get out there on the road, wherever you go, and you're going to get up at that podium after they introduce you, and no one will be there. And so I just want to do something for a second here. You guys know it. You know what to do. All right. All right, everybody, wave. So I'm going to show that to the cynical author guy when I get back. The other thing that I have done, the other first-time author rookie mistake that I'm doing, is I'm looking at internet reviews. I'm doing it. I'm getting on to Amazon. I'm looking at the internet reviews, and I'm spending time on Goodreads. I mean, these are things that experienced authors tell you do not do under any circumstance. But I'm doing it. I don't care. And so the other day, I'm on Goodreads. Is anybody here part of the Goodreads community? It's a fascinating, collection of people who care a lot about books and sometimes terminating people's books. But I'm reading it, and things are going well. There's nice notices from people around the country and, having nice things to say about my first-time book. And going through, that's nice, going through. And I get to a review, and it's from a Marilyn Gay of Belmont, Massachusetts. My mother. And so I paused because I didn't know that my mother was part of Goodreads. This was news to me. And I then look at the review, and Marilyn Gay of Belmont, Massachusetts has given Little Victories, Perfect Rules for Imperfect Living, 4 stars out of 5. Now, I don't want to sound like an ingrate. I will take a 4-star review happily. If anyone is to give this book a 4-star review, I will take that every day, twice on Sunday. I don't care. It's a fantastic, great review. But this was my mother. And I thought that even if my mother was a voracious reader, which she was, even if my mother had good constructive criticism for many of these great books that she read, I was her son. And wasn't I entitled to, a charity star? And so my mind began to scramble. This book that I've written, it's a personal book. There are a lot of stories in there about my childhood, my growing up, some dumb things I did, and my parents, both my mother and father, fully rendered in this book. And had my mother objected to something in here, had I offended her in some way, was there some detail which I just did not expect to anger her, which had angered her to the point that she gave my book 4 out of 5 stars? But then I really started to worry. Had the 4th star been the charity star? And I have one sibling, a brother, and I thought about calling him and saying to him, Mom gave my book 4 out of 5 stars online, but I knew what a brother would say. That's the funniest thing I've ever heard. So I didn't call him. Instead, I went to my editor, and I explained the situation. I said, my mother gave my book 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, and my editor looked at me and said, that's the funniest thing I've ever heard. So I went back and forth on this for days, and finally I worked up the courage to call my mother. And I called her, and I got on the phone, and I said, Mommy. I addressed her formally. Mommy. I said, Mommy, why did you give my book 4 out of 5 stars? And there was this long pause in which I saw my entire childhood flash before my eyes. And I could hear the wheels turning. And my mother said, what are you talking about, dear? I thought it was a 4-star scale. I thought I gave you 4 out of 4. I'm going to go and I'm going to change this right now. That's her story. and she's sticking to it. So today, if you go on to Goodreads, you will discover that Marilyn Gay of Belmont, Massachusetts has given Little Victories 5 out of 5 stars. This book began as basically a silly idea. I wanted to spoof advice books. I wanted to make fun of the culture of telling people what to do. I was always the person who walked through the bookstore, especially that airport bookstore. And you'd look at those titles, the ones that promised you a flat stomach and 8 hours, a 13-second work week, a home that was so tidy it would look like no one had ever spent 1 second living in it. And I looked at those advice books and I just felt that I don't relate to any of this. I lead a very imperfect life. Mistakes are part of my hourly experience. I wanted to write an advice book for the rest of us, for imperfect people, and to celebrate what I consider to be an underappreciated part of life, little victories, i.e., plugging the cell phone in before I went to bed, getting the children out the door without them crying, getting the children out the door without me crying, teaching my 3-year-old that butt fart is not a word he can say in public. And along the way, something major happened, which is that my father, my mentor, my dad, the most influential person in my life, was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And his life and everyone's life very close to him, all of our lives changed very dramatically. And life became really about this thing, this silly concept, this what I thought to be such a goofy thing, little victories. It really took on new weight. And so things that were just ordinary suddenly became so important. A good conversation, a walk around the block when he had enough energy to do it, driving in the country, a moment spent with his grandkids. These were small, everyday things, and yet they meant everything to us. You know, my father fought very hard into the end, and he benefited from a lot of groundbreaking treatment and care. But he also had great doctors and nurses, and they cared very deeply about giving him these little victories too. A little happiness, a little joy, and a little humor. He laughed right until the very end. And so when I write about this book and when I talk about this book, you know, it began as a subject of humor, but it's also incredibly meaningful and very personal to me, because I don't consider laughs anymore to be a little victory. Having a laugh and having lots of laughs can be everything. So that's the message, and I give you all 5 stars. I'd like to just do a quick reading from the book, if you don't mind. And it's from a chapter which is called Nobody's Cool, Especially Me. And it's about what I thought was going to be a very cool event in my life, which turned out to be anything but. This is a true story. I am many thousands of feet in the air, flying in a private jet with one of the most famous entertainers on the planet. This is how it's supposed to be when you're flying in a jet with one of the most famous entertainers on the planet. It's supposed to be cool. It's supposed to be awesome. This flight is coming straight from the MTV Video Music Awards in Los Angeles, where this famous entertainer has won the big prize of the night. This plane is going to be a party. Things will happen on this plane that aren't supposed to happen on planes, because the famous entertainer provides all the necessary airplane carte blanche. I will take in every second of this journey and have a story I can tell for life ad nauseum until all my friends roll their eyes at each other as I begin to tell it again. I will always, and this is important, I will always be very coy about saying who this famous person is because I have a sense of protection. I'm never going to tell anyone who it is because it's much cooler to not say who it is. Okay, it's Rihanna. And this is what it's like to be up in this airplane with Rihanna right now. It is not cool, not in the slightest. Everybody, including Rihanna, is fast asleep, except for me. I am pretty sure we are 30,000 feet in the air, but I am not sure what we are above. Maybe Colorado, maybe Idaho, maybe the Pyrenees. The cabin smells like uneaten Chinese food and what I think is stale marijuana. More than 2 people are snoring really loudly. The airplane is a Gulfstream 4 or a 5 or maybe a Gulfstream 3. I'm not sure it's even a Gulfstream. I don't know anything about private jets. I drive a family wagon that reeks of spilled milk and graham crackers. I'm up here because I've been promised a magazine interview with Rihanna, and I am freaking out because this stupid interview has to happen before the plane lands for a scheduled refueling stop. Rihanna, she was supposed to talk to me before the plane went airborne, but then she changed her mind. Then she was supposed to talk to me as soon as the plane went airborne, and she changed her mind again. She ate Chinese food instead, and I sat there watching Rihanna eat Chinese food and play with her iPhone, and I was just sitting there thinking of all the questions I could be asking while Rihanna was eating Chinese food and not playing around with her iPhone. Then Rihanna went to sleep. Rihanna's assistant came back to me where I was sitting in the airplane. There were only 8 or 9 of us on the jet, and said that she was going to wake up Rihanna when we were an hour from landing, and we would be able to do the interview then. That was 2 hours ago, and I am pretty sure I am beginning to feel the airplane descend. I look over at Rihanna's assistant to help. She's asleep. So in this moment, I am the exact opposite of cool. I am sitting in the darkness and I can feel the anxiety vapors lifting off the top of my head. My phone says it is close to 4 a.m., which is roughly our arrival time for our scheduled refueling stop in Minot, North Dakota. I say our scheduled refuel, but what I really mean is their scheduled refueling stop, because as soon as we land, they are going to dump me on the tarmac, and Rihanna and her gang will fly off to London, and I will hop a commuter jet to Minneapolis. And so I am panicking. I fear failure. I have a job to do, and so I get up, my neck scrunched, and I find Rihanna's assistant sleeping in her seat. She startles and whispers, "I will do what I can." A short while later, she comes back and says, "Rihanna will see you now." I make this sound like I'm in a long hallway. She's right there. Rihanna is barely 10 feet away, now sitting up on her bed, which is the only bed on the airplane. I move forward, down the aisle, and prop myself on the edge of the bed. I have interviewed people on airplanes before, and I have learned that it is important to get as physically close as possible to them. An airplane generates a tremendous amount of ambient noise, even when no one's talking. And I've heard horror stories, including someone who emerged from a flight with Bill Clinton to a tape recorder full of fuzz. So I'm getting close on the bed across the covers. Rihanna is lying back on the pillows, expressionless. I look like I'm about to read Rihanna a story in bed. I look like I'm going to read Rihanna Goodnight Moon. And so then we do the very unnatural but necessary thing of having a private conversation with people sitting quite close to us about Rihanna's life and her career. And I try to glean as much insight and revelation as you can press into 30 or so minutes of a descending airplane. Rihanna is as charming as a person can be when she has been woken up at 4 a.m. on a transcontinental transatlantic flight for an interview with a nervous stranger. She looks amazing, even though it does appear several times that she's falling back to sleep. her handbag does smell a little like marijuana too. But then I read later that some leather handbags actually smell like marijuana because of the way the leather is treated. So it might not have been marijuana, but what do I care? I sound like I'm making excuses for Rihanna. She can do whatever she wants. The flight attendant on the jet comes over and says the flight is about to land and I should return to my seat. The plane lands. And like that, I am off the jet, still in the Navy suit I wore to the VMAs, my tie knotted. I must look like a lunatic when I walk into the airport terminal, where a bearded man in a hat offers to drive me to the commercial gate. And on the way, he tells me a little bit about Minot, which is in the midst of an oil boom full of transplant workers, which explains the rows upon rows of pickup trucks in the airport and all the guys in overalls in the ticketing area. He doesn't ask me what I'm doing in that suit, and I don't tell him. I guess there was a chance he'd think it was cool, but probably not. And it strikes me the ludicrousness of cool, how situational and contextual it is, how even the coolest moments are never as cool as they seem. Here I am, an active participant in the coolness industrial complex. This airplane flight is going to be turned into a magazine cover story, some true weapons grade stuff. And I am sweaty and sleep deprived, and I feel like a Martian out of it, insecure, in need of a juice box and a nap. Months from now, I will be able to talk about this moment with some cool distance. Nothing solidifies cool like the passage of time, but cool will never be an accurate representation of the moment. Cool fled the scene. Anxiety was always the feeling. And maybe there's something to be said for being honest and admitting that coolness is almost always a pose and seldom real. And no, I am not saying that in a way to make myself sound cool. Thank you. I think it's the question time. If anybody has a question or a complaint or wants to lob some object, animate or inanimate, please just go right ahead. There are microphones, just like they do it in the movies, if anyone has a question to ask. In the front, sir. You don't even need a microphone, but I think they want you to have one because so the people in back, the millions in back can hear you.
Jason, your columns are terrific. I've been reading them for years.
Thank you.
And I really want to know how long it takes you to prepare for any one of them.
12 minutes. It really depends. There are days in which the idea and the writing comes fast and furiously, and that's always the best when you can't wait to put it on a page and it's just sort of jumping at you. But then that doesn't always happen, and you're struggling, and you're tearing it up and going back at it and talking about it with an editor. It's never the same thing twice, and that's part of the great thing about writing a column, I think, is that it takes on this, it's this actual living beast where you build a relationship with an audience, and I'm grateful for your readership. But you also know that, it's like, I'll have good days and bad days, just like any friendship. And so I think that I've learned over time to not force the issue. And I got some good advice early on from somebody when I was starting out doing this, saying, look, if you're going to do this and you're going to be an opinion columnist, and I think this applies to if you're an opinion columnist of any caliber, or any subject matter, rather, just be yourself and stay true to who you are. Don't take an opinion, don't take a position just for the sake of an argument. Now, we see an awful lot of that nowadays, whether it's politics or national affairs, and certainly in sports, of people jumping up and down and screaming at each other for the sake of attention and argument. I certainly don't think there's anything constructive coming out of it. And I think you can get a little lost in that. I think you can get lost in sort of the theater of it. And, I want to entertain people and I want to make things fun to read. But I always want to just be myself, because I feel that way you'll always be straight. Yes.
So how did your article on Rihanna come out?
I did not tell that version of the story exactly for the magazine. It ended up being pretty good, I think, in the end, hopefully, because she actually is a great conversation. I mean, it's always better when the subjects are willing to talk about anything. And if you know anything about her, she kind of just lets it hang out and says what she thinks. You know, public opinion be damned. And I think that's benefited her well. She's genuine and authentic, and there's really literally nothing you can't ask her. I mean, she will tell you if she thinks it's a dumb question or so on, but she's straight and true in that respect, and I feel like people connect with that with her. So the airplane ride, I lost like 30 pounds of anxiety, but I think in the end the story turned out okay. Yes, sir.
I enjoy your Saturday columns in the Wall Street Journal.
Thank you.
And it's often on golf. Do you have other sports where they're bigger than life individuals that you deal with, and what's your favorite and what's your least favorite?
So in other words, who's a jerk and who's not? Well, let me put it this way. Let's take golf, for example. Are you a golf fan? Okay. So when I started doing this column about 6 or 7 years ago, this was just about the time when Tiger Woods was getting into all the trouble. You know, this was 2009, and, you know, things were going badly for him. And golf was really about two personalities. It was about Tiger Woods and a little bit of Phil Mickelson. And those guys are global superstars who they don't need the press for anything. They don't have to do interviews. They're, you know, they've seen it all, they've made it all, they've done all sorts of crazy stuff, some cases too crazy. And it was not a very fun environment to be around as a sports writer, because the most, you know, beloved from a fan perspective players in the game were not terribly interesting people to hear from, because they just didn't care. Flash forward 6 years now, and in the sport of golf, after some real pessimism about the next generation, you have this wonderful group of young players who are, you know, all hovering around 25, Jordan Spieth being 22, I believe, who are incredible golfers, who are humble still and sort of haven't seen it all. Now, the test of time will tell, like, what they turn into when they're 35 years old and so on, and have won X amount of majors. But it shows how the sport can change within a rather short window of time, which I find is a great thing about sports. I feel like, as a subject matter, we're very privileged to cover it, because it's something it's basically low stakes when you get down to it. You know, we all want to win and lose and stuff, but, you know, this is not life or death. These are games, okay? But people care. You know, there's passion about it. There's reader excitement to read about it. So it's the best of both worlds that way. Yes, sir.
If you've been following any of the Philadelphia sports, we'll just concentrate on the Sixers for now.
I was told very sternly, no Sixers jokes beforehand.
My question is that they basically have gone into a tanking mode for 3 years, trying to get the best talent they could get, the Sam Hinkie plant.
Yeah.
And apparently there's some issue with this plan, or else they wouldn't have picked another person
Jerry Colangelo
to sort of guide the plan there. But it just seems like other teams have done the same thing, have tanked to get the best player.
Yeah.
But it just seems like if Philadelphia's doing it, that it's not the right way to do it. So I just wondered what your what your feeling is.
Let me see if I follow this correctly. Were this philosophy to be practiced in another major American city, you might think it had some validity to it. But the fact that it's happening here in Philly, it must be no good. The Sixers are a mystery. I mean, I'm watching this from afar. I certainly don't have great insight into the actual day-to-day of what's happening there. Certainly the hiring at Colangelo yesterday speaks to some disruption that's happening with the team, and some belief that maybe this formula that Hinkie has put together, which is to sort of, mix together these random parts and trade them up considerably until you sort of achieve some sort of useful mass. Is it? It might not be working, and you compare it to just up the 95 in Boston, where they had a similarly purged team where they got rid of all the sort of old guard and started a team that probably shouldn't have won more than 20 or 30 games, and sort of have, through draft picks but also some smart free agency moves and getting a good coach, have sort of put themselves in a position where they're certainly not a contender, but they were a playoff team last year. So I'm not utterly convinced that they've happened upon some sort of brilliant formula here, but I also feel I don't know if strongly is the right word, but I feel sympathy for people who are fans in this respect, that while I feel that franchises are shrewd to take the long view in developing rosters and creating a tradition of talent and sort of a system, the idea of just abjectly throwing away season after season, and we're not talking about, when we talk about tanking, we typically talk about 1 or 2 years maybe, but we're not in for 3 or 4 at least with the Sixers. And I worry about alienating people to the point where they don't return. That, certainly if they do gel into something formidable, it's not going to be next year or even the year after that. It might be 4 or 5 years down the road. And at that point, are you really looking at 6 dismal years in a row, or going back quite a bit further than that, frankly? To what extent do you start to alienate people that they don't come back? That's a tough one. But then you look at New York. The most dismal thing that existed in New York sports last year were the New York Knicks. Now they go to the draft, and they draft a 7'3" Latvian guy who everyone goes, who? And the fans literally boo boo the man as he walks onto stage, boo him as a no-name. He's now could run for mayor. It's an incredible transformation. So maybe it just takes one part. Yes, sir.
Where do you think football's going, and would you want your children to play the game?
Well, as you can tell, as a former all-pro linebacker myself, it's an excellent question, and it literally is a topic that I think comes up almost every day in my life, not just in terms of my professional life, but in talking to parents. I'm a parent of very young children, so they're not playing organized sports, sadly. But I want to sort of give you 2 answers here. One is that I feel like the real change that's going to happen in football is going to be at that grassroots level, and it's already happening. And it's not just happening in football, interestingly. The conversation, as many of you know, is happening in sports like soccer. It's happening in other contact sports. It's happening in things like lacrosse. I mean, head injuries are not just football. And if you talk to coaches at any level, it doesn't matter if it's rinky-dink or big time or anything, they're all having to have conversations with parents about head injuries and head injury precautions and what you can do if you can do anything at all. And I think that the impact will be felt upon games a generation from now. You're seeing the numbers in Pop Warner coming down, the numbers of high school football coming down a little bit, some programs closing up. Once you start to have issues with liability with universities, especially schools that are on the fence about whether or not these programs are financially worthwhile in the first place, I think you're going to see dialing back at the Division I level. It's just not going to happen at the professional level, I think, for a long time. And I think there's always going to be, an audience for it. It's the most popular form of mass entertainment in America. Nothing about any of these crises has contributed to any kind of ratings or attention decline with the NFL. If anything, it's been the opposite. So it's this wild paradox that we're living in. I don't dispute for one moment that people find it really compelling entertainment and love the game and care about it, especially if they can beat the Patriots. I mean, come on. but it feels more fraught. I hear that from readers a lot, that they're not giving it up, but it feels there's just a different feeling about it. I mean, we all know if you care about the game and you see someone take a bad hit, I'm not embarrassed to say, 10 years ago we all stood up and went, yeah, or 5 years ago, and now it's a different feeling. The announcers treat us there. The game used to market DVDs of the nastiest hits that you would see on the field. So the climate around it is changing. As for my own children, my wife tells me my children can do whatever they want, and I can't say what they can and cannot do. So I mean, I would like to steer them away from football simply because, I don't know how to play it. But I think it's probably good advice to let them make their own choices. It is interesting, though, to hear Tom Brady's dad and LeBron James and people like that say that they wouldn't let their own kids do it. It is staggering, those conversations. Yes, sir.
I wonder if you'd care to comment about how parents' involvement in youth sports gets sort of out of control. I mean,
even when the refereeing is bad? I mean, he was clearly offsides. Are you kidding me? Again, a topic I hear about all the time from parents. And this is one of the reasons I can't wait for my kids to start playing youth sports. I need the material. I mean, it's going to be incredible. And I'm going to be very interested to see what kind of sports parent I was. I had a father who was a high school coach who used to put a lawn chair behind the outfield and read the newspaper and barely look up at the game because he felt that was about the proper amount of attention to give his kids' Little League game. And he probably was right. What's fascinating about the youth sports and the complaining about youth sports and the attention level given to it is that the issue is not the kids. The kids are the kids. They like to run around. They can learn something. There's real value in youth sports. I don't dispute that for a second. Teamwork and those kinds of things about collaboration, exercise, that's valuable. It's the parents and the sort of vicarious living, the financial commitment, the driving that happens, all that kind of stuff makes parents cuckoo. And my son is 3 years old, and a friend of mine said, I'm going to give you some advice. Don't drive past hockey rinks for the next few years because you don't want your kid anywhere near them because you're going to be driving around for the rest of your life for hockey. But another topic on that front that I'm interested in is repetitive stress injuries, specifically, leg injuries, knee injuries, arm injuries with pitchers and people getting hurt, to the point that they can't play sports again. And if you talk to, I think this mentioned this, if you talk to orthopedics, you will not find an orthopedic surgeon, if there's one in the audience, please raise your hand, who will tell you playing a sport 10 or 12 months of the year is a good idea. I mean, it's just a terrible idea. You just should not be doing the same kind of repetitive motions of any kind, especially weight bearing or any kind of contact over and over again. And yet we see the growth all over the place of 10 months of the year, baseball, basketball, any sport. And these kids can be 8, 9. This used to be something, the domain of 14, 17-year-old kids wanting to play college. It's not, it's everywhere now. And so it's bad for basically not just the kids in the immediate moment, but also for their long term. You think it's a ticket. You think it's a way to get that scholarship or preposterously become a professional, which we know the odds are just comical. It's also bad for their chances of that because of the injury level. Yes, sir.
The book on football and TV that was made for football and TV had a marriage in the 60s that's going on for 50 years. That's just a comment. My real question is, where do you get your material? Do you do it from reading? I mean, personal interviews or?
Sure.
How do you do it?
It's all over the place. Okay, so this week I had a story about the college football playoff. The 4 teams that got picked for the playoff. That's on the basis of that's news. I'm writing a Sunday column for Monday. That's the news, and so it's my commentary on the 4. Actually, my commentary was about the fact that this playoff this year is going to be on New Year's Eve, which is an interesting conflict for television because all of a sudden they're competing not against other things on TV. They're competing against people going out and tipping over cars and drinking champagne. And then my other story this week is about a fighter I went to go profile in Ireland, a ultimate fighter, mixed martial arts guy. So I went to Dublin last month and spent some time with that guy, and so that, sort of a classic profile type thing. For Thursday, I believe, if they win tonight, which they seem to be doing, I'm writing about the Golden State Warriors, who have this incredible 23-game winning streak right now. I went to go see them on Sunday night in Brooklyn. They played and won there. So yeah, it's a mix of things. But to what he asked early on, I love it when it's like all of a sudden something wacky happens and you got to do it quick. And the planning is good and it's good to have stuff in the chamber, but it's always fun to have something that just happens all of a sudden. You're like, oh my God, we have to write about this right now. Tom Brady suspended for 4 games. I like stuff like that. Yes.
Who was the most interesting person you've interviewed, and what about them was interesting?
I think 2 athletes that I've interviewed that have a little more than meets the eye. They could not be sort of, at first glance, more different. But Roger Federer, the tennis legend, and then LeBron James, the basketball player. Both people who are obviously incredibly accomplished in their sports, but also have this whole sort of curiosity about the world around them beyond their sport. And not to generalize, because they're very different people in terms of temperament and so on, but it's very interesting. Athletes are asked to live in a very tight box, especially in public view and in terms of the way the media wants to treat them. No one is asking Roger Federer what he thinks about European elections, or no one's coming to LeBron James and asking for his impressions of the presidential primaries, or maybe they are a little bit now, but everyone's getting asked. But there's a depth to these guys, and there's a interest in the world around them, which I think is not shown that, it hasn't been shown that much. There's a sense of humor. Roger Federer, you wouldn't know this necessarily from watching him play tennis, because he's sort of an elegant guy, very funny guy, sort of likes to joke about comic books and video games and so on. LeBron is very funny. You go see LeBron in the locker room, he's the guy who's making all the jokes and picking on everybody. I always find that to be the most satisfying kind of interview experience of doing a one-on-one thing, where you see a part of the personality that doesn't present itself typically on traditional media. And I will say another thing to that. You don't see it on TV. I think it's a little different. I think guys sometimes, women, athletes of any kind, they give you a little something different when they're on camera. It's just natural. It's human nature to have that light on you and sort of try to be on your best behavior and maybe take your answers down a notch. But when you don't have that camera, and when it's just a tape recorder, and they know it's a story and stuff like that, maybe the guard comes down a little bit and you see a little bit more of the person. Okay, great. There's one in the back. I know a gentleman's had his hand up for a while. Oh, yes. Sorry, forgive me.
I had 2 questions. How did you get into sports, or did you grow up always being interested in following sports?
First of all, I'm going to get a referee ruling on it. Are her 2 or your 2?
And my other one is, do you have difficulty lining up interviews with the sports key people?
Okay.
Kobe Bryant and people like that.
So did I grow up with it? I'm sorry. Again, I grew up in a sports family. My dad was a high school tennis coach for 40 years. I have lots of memories of watching sporting events with him. But a funny thing about my father, he thought of sports writing as frivolous. And so when we get the newspaper delivered to the house, he would take the sports section out of the newspaper and put it on top of the refrigerator. And he would make me read national affairs, world affairs, politics, science, obits. I'd have to read the rest of the paper before he would give me back the sports section. So in the grand tradition of you becoming whatever your parents try to stop you from becoming, that's what happened. And with your second question, are athletes hard to get? Yes is the sort of a global answer to almost every occasion, because what I'm asking for is more than just standing in the locker room jamming the mic in their hand. I'm not really interested in that at this point, simply because very seldom do you get somebody who's off message and giving you something beyond the usual. Now, there are many people who do this for a living who are vastly more skilled than I am in that kind of environment and can really get something and glean something. I'm not as good as them. They're better at that kind of thing. That's scrum. We've all seen it on TV. We're all like holding up microphones. I want to get them away, and I want to pull them away from, their usual haunts. Hopefully meet them in a home, meet them at their favorite place to go have lunch, have some kind of experience like that. Again, sort of get to the person that is a little bit off message from the person they're typically presenting on camera. And that's a little harder to get. But I've been lucky. A nice thing about the Wall Street Journal is that whenever you go to a high-profile athlete and ask them for an interview, they invariably say, well, with whom? And they say the Wall Street Journal. And they immediately start to think, do you have any stock tips? They immediately start to, the wheels turn, because every athlete, and particularly the high-profile ones, they think of themselves as entrepreneurial now. They all want to be Warren Buffett. They don't aspire to be Michael Jordan anymore. They want to be Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Mark Zuckerberg. And so I think we might have a leg up there. Yes?
I'm just wondering what other authors that, are in your style, not sticking the microphone in the locker room, do you admire?
Well, I admire a lot of those guys too, because I think that's a real skill, and it's a hard job, and there are a great many people who do a brilliant job at it. But the writers that I grew up reading, I grew up a Boston kid. Don't hold it against me. And I read the Globe, and so these were, we all remember Will McDonough covering football, Peter Gammons covering baseball, Bob Ryan covering basketball. These guys were like, Mount Rushmore to me for sports writing, because they wrote in a very sort of like conversational way. I always liked the reporters, and I've gone back and tried to read most of the greats, like the Red Smiths and the Dick Youngs and the Murray Kemptons and the Jim Murray especially, who, they just always sounded like they were just nudging you at the bar, and they're like, this is what DiMaggio's like, this is what Mantle's like, this is what Bill Russell's like, this is what the game was like last night, and try to speak to you completely on the level in a explanatory and fun way. And those are the writers that I like to read. I wish I had sort of an elevated high literary taste sometimes. I wish I could write in major compound sentences, but the truth is I always try to write like I'm having a conversation, you and I. And that's the kind of stuff that I like to read. And I like to sing. No, just kidding. Thank you very much. Can I just want to point out one quick thing. There's a gentleman in the audience right here named John Villanova, who was the researcher, fact checker, reader, everything on this book. So all the problems in it, you need to run by John in front. John is a student, a PhD at Penn. Is that a good school? Okay. Congratulations. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That was good fun. Thank you. Very great questions.